My name is John Williams, whose name has been changed. My job is working the night shift as a security guard at an old high school in rural Pennsylvania. This school is very old, with old brick walls and long, wide hallways. During the day, it's full of laughter, the sound of teaching from students and teachers. But when night falls, it becomes a completely different place, large, dark, and terrifying. My shift starts from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Most of the time, I'm in the small security room near the main gate, where there are security camera monitors overseeing all areas of the school. Occasionally, I do rounds, walking through the empty hallways, checking doors and windows. The first few nights working here were quite peaceful. There was only the sound of the clock ticking, the wind outside, and the creaking of the old building. However, that silence was sometimes more terrifying than noise. The school at night had its own unique atmosphere. It wasn't just quietness, but also the feeling that the place was asleep, but a sleep full of strange dreams. I got used to being alone in this large space. I usually read books, check news on my phone, or just simply sit and look at the camera monitors. The cameras were placed in the main hallways, stairwells, gymnasium, library, and a few classrooms. The screens displayed black and white images, blurry in the weak light of the hallway lamps. About the second week working here, I started hearing strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the old building, or the wind, floorboards creaking somewhere in the distance, doors slightly moving. I ignored them, thinking it was normal for an old building. However, those noises became more and more frequent and clearer, especially the footsteps. I sat in the security room, looking at the camera monitors, but my ears were listening. I heard faint footsteps in the empty hallway. Upstairs, the footsteps sounded like someone walking slowly, steadily. I looked up at the camera monitor watching the upstairs hallway. Empty. No one was there. I thought maybe it was just an echo, or I was imagining it. But those footsteps continued to echo every night. The night shift in the empty hallways was no longer just silence. It had added mysterious sounds. And I started to feel that I wasn't just alone in this school at night. Darkness and footsteps had appeared. The footsteps in the empty hallway upstairs echoed regularly every night, always around midnight or a little later. They weren't very loud, but noticeable enough to catch my attention. The footsteps sounded clear, like light footsteps, steady, walking along the hallway. I sat in the security room, looking at the camera monitor watching the upstairs hallway. The screen only showed the empty hallway, with rows of closed room doors. No one was there. I started to feel uneasy. I knew there was no one in the school at this hour. Except me. I tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe it was the ventilation system? Or mice or some animal? But the footsteps sounded too clear, too much like human footsteps. I decided to do a patrol to the upstairs. I brought my flashlight, walked through the downstairs hallways, then went up the stairs. As I went up the stairs, the footsteps upstairs seemed to stop. I stood at the foot of the stairs, listening. Silence. I slowly went up the stairs and stepped into the upstairs hallway. I shone my flashlight everywhere. The hallway was empty. The room doors were closed. I walked along the hallway to the area where I usually heard the footsteps. I stopped, listening. Complete silence. It felt like the footsteps had disappeared as soon as I got close. I passed by the classrooms, looking inside through the small windows on the doors. All were empty, with desks and chairs neatly arranged or scattered in the darkness. I walked to the end of the upstairs hallway, checking the doors. All were securely locked. I returned to the stairs and went down to the ground floor. As soon as I stepped onto the ground floor, the footsteps upstairs echoed again. This time, the footsteps sounded a bit faster, as if the person was walking at a normal pace. I stood on the ground floor, looking up the stairs, listening to the footsteps upstairs. They went along the hallway, then stopped at a specific area. It felt like a game. Something was upstairs, walking around, and stopping when I got close. What should not be existed in this school at night? The footsteps in the empty hallway were real, and they weren't my imagination. I returned to the security room, sat down in my chair, and looked at the camera monitors. I focused the camera on the upstairs hallway, where I heard the footsteps. The screen only showed an empty hallway, but I knew something was there. Something was moving in the darkness of the school. The hallway of echoes had become the dwelling of mystery and fear. And I, the night shift security guard, was the only one who knew about it. The following nights, the footsteps in the empty hallway upstairs continued to echo. They became a familiar, though terrifying, part of my shift. I still did my rounds, but always felt uneasy going upstairs. The feeling of being watched was always present. Every time I approached the area with the sounds would stop. I spent more time observing the security camera monitors, especially the camera watching the upstairs hallway and the classrooms in that area. I wanted to see if the camera could capture something that the naked eye couldn't see. At first, I didn't see anything, just the black and white, static image of the school at night. Then, one night, around 3 in the morning, as I was sitting watching the camera monitors, drinking coffee, I suddenly saw something on the screen. It was the camera watching a classroom upstairs. The room was dark, with only weak light from the hallway lamps filtering in through the small window on the door. In the camera frame, I saw the student desks and chairs neatly arranged. And then, one of the chairs moved on its own. It slowly slid across the floor, making a very faint creaking sound in the camera's audio. The chair moved a short distance, then stopped. I froze in horror. I stared at the screen, unable to believe what I had just seen. A chair moving on its own in an empty classroom. I knew there was no one in that classroom. The door was closed. It wasn't the wind. The chair had moved across the floor. I rewound the camera footage several times, watching the scene over and over again. The chair clearly moved on the screen. Evidence. Evidence from the camera. This school wasn't just having strange noises. It was truly haunted, and the security camera had captured it. I shivered. I sat alone in the small security room, in the large school, and I had just seen a chair move on its own on the screen. That meant the footsteps I was hearing were probably real too. Perhaps they were spirits walking in the hallway, and they could move objects. Fear enveloped me. I looked around the small security room, then looked out the window, into the darkness of the school. I no longer felt safe. The moving chair on the camera screen was undeniable evidence. It had confirmed that what should not be in this school at night was real. And I, the night shift security guard, was the only one who knew about it, along with the security camera. After witnessing the chair move on its own on the camera screen, I started spending almost my entire shift observing the security camera monitors. My fear and curiosity had reached their peak. The following nights, the paranormal activity in the school seemed to escalate. The footsteps in the empty hallway became more frequent and clearer. Sometimes, the footsteps sounded like running, or like multiple people walking around. And on the camera monitors, more terrifying phenomena began to appear. It wasn't just the chair moving. I saw desks sliding across the floor on their own in different classrooms. Books falling from shelves in the library when no one was nearby. Doors automatically opening and then slamming shut with a loud bang. There was a camera placed at the end of the upstairs hallway, facing the stairs. On that camera screen, sometimes I would see blurry shadows flit across the edge of the frame, too fast to clearly identify. In one instance, I saw a small shadow, shaped like a child, flit very quickly at the end of the hallway, then disappear. I felt as if the spirits in the school were manifesting their presence more clearly. The paranormal activity seemed to be concentrated on the upper floor, especially in the classroom and hallway areas. I started reviewing the recorded footage from previous nights, hoping to find more evidence. I found notable footage: chairs and desks subtly moving, doors automatically opening and closing, strange noises in the camera's audio. There was one piece of footage showing the gymnasium at night. The room was empty, but for a moment, a basketball that was lying still on the floor suddenly rolled a short distance, then stopped. The evidence from the camera was undeniable. This school was truly heavily haunted. I tried to find out about the history of this school. I searched for information about tragic events that had happened here in the past. Perhaps there was a reason these spirits were trapped or angry. I found stories about accidents that had happened in the school years ago, about a small fire in the science lab, about a student who had passed away from illness right at the school. However, none of the stories explained the current level of haunting. Spirits on screen were becoming clearer. I felt as if I was being drawn into their world. Sitting alone in the security room late at night, staring at the monitors showing paranormal activity, made me feel more isolated and scared than ever. Paranormal activity was escalating in the school, and I knew I was the only witness to it. My night shifts at the old high school in Pennsylvania had become sleepless nights, filled with fear and haunting. The paranormal activity on the camera monitors intensified. I saw desks and chairs moving constantly in different classrooms. Doors automatically opened and slammed shut as if someone was walking angrily in the hallway. Books were thrown off shelves in the library. The footsteps in the empty hallway also became louder, clearer. Sometimes, I heard footsteps running down the stairs, as if someone was in a hurry. One night, as I was sitting in the security room, looking at the camera monitor watching the downstairs hallway, I suddenly saw something at the end of the hallway, not far from where I was sitting. A shadow, a blurry black shadow, standing still. It wasn't a normal shadow caused by light. The shadow was denser, like a hole in the darkness. I froze in horror. That black shadow. It stood there for a few seconds, then slowly glided. It glided along the hallway, making no sound. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The black shadow glided past the classrooms, then slowly disappeared from the frame. At the same time, I heard faint footsteps from outside the security room door. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, listening. I felt as if someone was standing right outside the wooden door of the security room, just a few steps away from me. A sudden bone-chilling cold draft enveloped me, colder than any cold I had ever felt. I looked at the camera monitor outside the security room door. The screen showed the hallway outside the security room, empty. No one was there. However, I felt a very strong, very close presence. I knew that the black shadow I saw at the end of the hallway had probably moved here. Or perhaps, something else was right outside the door. I sat still in the security room, not daring to move. Footsteps in the empty hallway. The moving chair on the screen. the gliding shadow, and the feeling of being watched, all created a silent confrontation between me and the spirits in the school. They were there. They knew I was here. And they seemed to be trying to reach me. I knew that my night shifts at this school would never be normal again. The late-night hallway had become the place where I faced the supernatural. The following night shifts at the old school were a terrifying repetition of what I had experienced. Footsteps, objects moving on camera, and the feeling of being watched became regular occurrences. I lived in constant fear and tension. I no longer had any doubt. This school was heavily haunted, and the spirits here were very active at night. I tried to find out more about the history of the school. Deeper than what I had searched for before. I searched in the town's archives. In old newspaper articles, I found terrifying information about an incident that happened at this school in the 1950s. A large fire broke out on the upper floor, in the classroom area, and a few students and a teacher died in that fire. It is said that the cause of the fire was not clearly determined. There were rumors of a conflict between students and a teacher, or of a terrible accident. The terrifying truth about that fire could explain why the paranormal activity was concentrated on the upper floor, and why there were footsteps and shadows resembling children and adults. The spirits of the students and the teacher who died in the fire were still trapped in this school. They were the ones causing the noises and moving the objects. I looked back at the camera footage showing the chair moving, objects falling, and the shadows gliding. Now, knowing about the fire, those images became even more horrifying. The answer from the darkness was here. The spirits of those who had died tragically. Were they trying to say something? Or simply repeating what happened on their last night? I don't know. But I knew they were there. And they were active. I didn't dare to talk about this with colleagues or supervisors. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or would think I was overly stressed. I just kept what I had witnessed and the camera footage as evidence for myself. My night shifts at the old school were a constant confrontation with the supernatural. I had gotten used to the footsteps, to the movement of objects on the screen, to the sudden cold drafts, but I would never get used to the feeling of being watched. The feeling that someone was right outside the security room, just a wooden door away from me. The camera's testimony was undeniable. It had recorded the existence of spirits in this school. I don't know if I will do this job much longer, but I know that what I have seen and experienced will forever haunt me. The old high school in Pennsylvania is not just a building. It is a grave full of trapped spirits. And they are active at night. My story is a testimony from the darkness. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, or stories based on accounts and recorded evidence, like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on the channel to follow our latest videos. We will bring you more terrifying and haunting stories. Thank you for listening.